And as this in-state generation, whether it be wind, geothermal, solar, has gone under the permitting process and siting process and all, it's been identified, as is the case in many situations, where there's certain overlap with federal and state regs, certain areas where we could provide some streamlining so that there's more coordination between states, feds, and localities in terms of the siting and permitting of these types of facilities. So the purpose of this bill is to extend some of those things to the San Joaquin Valley. Last year, there was a bill, SB 8X34, by Senator Padilla, which initiated the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan. And that plan was to provide some of this assistance around the siting and the permitting, and it was limited only to solar photovoltaic and solar thermal technologies. But we actually have additional renewable generation facilities that are beyond just solar photovoltaic and solar thermal, which deserve to be provided the same provisions under the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan. So AB 1X13 seeks to provide this additional statutory direction for the San Joaquin Valley and expands the eligible technologies to wind and geothermal in the DRECP. So that's the basic essence of the bill, and I respectfully ask for your support.
Thank you very much. There are suggested amendments on page 3 and 4 of the analysis. Have you reviewed those, and are those
yes, and those are the author, lead author, Assemblymember Perez, and the joint authors have agreed to accept those.
Okay. So the bill that will be before us, is as amended and with the amendments recommended in the analysis. Before I open it to the public, are there any questions of Ms. Skinner from members? Oh, I've been trying to welcome the new members as they come in. I want to welcome Ms. Halderman as well. And I'm glad to have you on the committee. Any questions or comments before I open it up to the public? Mr. Knight?
Yeah, I do appreciate the bill. This is something that we try and get to here in California. Is we want these renewables to be here, and it seems like certain policy doesn't allow them to be here. So it's the ultimate catch-22. I think that this bill is addressing certain issues. I do appreciate that you accepted the amendment. I think the $75,000 was a little bit steep, and we should only be charging for what it's going to cost. So I do appreciate the bill, and we'll get my eye vote.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Grove?
I just was making sure that when I looked at that $75,000 and then I looked at the incidental take permits that are just duplicated or rubber stamped from the federal government, and then for California to charge people that want to create jobs another $75,000 or $150,000, I thought that was a little high. So my question, I guess, is that who determines if it goes to $150,000?
Let me look at the
I might be able to help you out here.
Yeah.
The committee consultant says it's Fish and Game that determines that.
So we just allow Fish and Game to have the authority to arbitrarily raise from $75,000 to $150,000 just for what reason?
Well, by accepting the amendments, we would allow DFG review to basically not have to assign that full $75,000. So it's not so much an issue of allowing it to be raised up to $150,000. It's more that we're now giving them the ability to even go below that.
And the criteria is actual cost.
Right.
As opposed to it just being an arbitrary charge.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Certainly.
Okay. Let me open it up to witnesses in favor. Please come forward. State your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. My name is Shannon Eddy. I'm the Executive Director of the Large Scale Solar Association. We support the bill in concept. We think it's definitely headed in the right direction. Look forward to working with the committee staff and with you, Mr. Chairman, and the author on clarifying some of the sections related to CEQA and the DRECP. The DRECP is a living growing entity, so some of the portions of the bill that the committee raised would probably need to be amended. We do support the suggested amendments as well. Just a point of clarification on the fees, because I know there have been some questions on this. The solar industry actually suggested that we have some fees involved with the permitting process, given the number of permits that we're moving through the Energy Commission and the Department of Fish and Game, and the fact that the budget crisis is hitting and they're understaffed and furloughed. We actually thought that having some level of reasonable permitting fee would help the process, so we're okay with that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I should point out relative to amendments, I misstated a little bit earlier that the motion will be as amended when in fact we're going to be approving it with the concepts of these amendments, but they're actually going to be taken at appropriate because they haven't been fully drafted yet. So, other witnesses in favor? Any witnesses in opposition? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
One just
Yes,
little
you may close.
What I failed to also mention is that this bill, with the exceptions of the amendments that we just accepted, was passed by the legislature last year, and it did have bipartisan support. I don't remember the exact vote, but I think it was a very there was significant support on both sides of the aisle. Yeah. So.
Okay. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Chesbro.
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Knight. Knight, aye. Brownlee. Brownlee, aye. Dickinson. Dickinson, aye. Grove. Grove, aye. Halderman. Halderman, no. Huffman. Huffman, aye. Monning. Monning, aye. Skinner.
Aye.
Skinner, aye.
Okay, that bill is out. Next bill on the agenda is AB X1 Special Session 114, Energy Upgrade Financing. Ms. Skinner.
Thank you. Again, this is a bill that is in the package and of 4 clean energy jobs bills put forward by Senate and Assembly leadership. This bill is similar to the last bill, patterned after a piece of legislation that was adopted last year, again by bipartisan support. And what the intent of last year's bill was to establish a program that called PACE. And what it did was allowed for local governments to administer in effect, like a loan program where the loans would be tied to the property, and the payment of the loan by the property owner would be through an assessment on their property tax. And what this would enable is that you have many energy efficiency upgrade type of projects or solar installation projects where the payback can be the average owner of a home, for example. This is not the same in commercial buildings, but for a home is potentially 5 years. And yet the amortization of loans for those type of projects might really be a longer term. And so what PACE was doing was basically allowing for the fact that such improvements might have a value well beyond just the ownership of the house and be a great benefit to the property. And so it made it more affordable and more accessible to a wider variety of property owners. So that and where the state was involved was that we have a renewable trust fund, and what the bill in effect did was enable the renewable trust fund to be the securitization for those loans. Now what happened is that program ran into a snag because, as we know, there's a mortgage crisis, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the owners of most mortgages, basically kind of panicked that they didn't want to add any complications to mortgage when you have this kind of mortgage crisis. So that while the program was adopted by the legislature and signed into law by the governor, it was never able to be implemented because of the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac problem. So we went back to the drawing boards and we said, how can we make such loans available? Because we had local governments, counties and cities up and down the state who were all ready to, and we had interest and support all up and down the state. We had contractors ready. We had, homeowners and property owners, commercial buildings ready. So we went to the Energy Commission, to the Treasurer's Office, to others, and we said, how can we construct something similar to still provide, to get these kind of loans out into the marketplace and allow property owners to be able to do these kind of upgrades? So what the Treasurer's Office worked with private sector banks and came up with a program where the private sector banks would actually be the lenders, but the Renewable Trust Fund would still be the loan guarantee to add assurances, and it would be administered by the Treasurer's Office instead of the localities. It would no longer be on the property tax bill, but the program would still be very similar, where the same kind of property owners, commercial and residential, would be able to access these loans, and the property owners would be able to learn about it through their local governments, through contractors, through Energy Commission, through a whole variety of mechanisms. So we're basically trying to replicate that program, but not through the property tax assessment, but through private sector bank loans, still using the Renewable Energy Trust Fund as the loan guarantee and administered by the Treasurer's Office. So that's, in effect, what the bill does. A very similar program in Michigan and Pennsylvania has had high degree of success, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I ask for your support.
Okay, thank you. There was one concern raised in the analysis that I'm willing to wait until we hear testimony and hear the whole thing before deciding whether it should be in or out, but and that is that the charging equipment for electric vehicles be included in the loan program. And while that's a very laudable goal, it's really a transportation issue. And this loan program has been focused on load reduction through alternative energy and conservation. So the question is, does it belong here? And does it set a precedent for other non-load reducing kinds of activities that would kind of dilute the loan fund? So, and whether that should be funded some other way. But did you want to respond to that at this point?
I think the interest was that since these were loans to do upgrades, and we can see that there is the development of this electric vehicle market, and we could have a draw on our electrical system due to that. And if the upgrade could include say solar generated charging, that would be a benefit. But I certainly, it wasn't in the original bill, so if the committee's preference is to eliminate that section of this bill, I'm perfectly fine with it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Huffman.
I think it's fair that the committee analysis flagged that issue, and while in the prior legislation on this we may have focused on load reducing, I'm not sure that the PACE program is necessarily limited to that. I think it's clean energy. And clearly these charging stations and moving vehicles from fossil burning fuels to cleaner and cleaner electricity through the grid, I think is pretty consistent with the public benefit goal of the PACE program. So I, for one, Mr. Chair, appreciate the chance to discuss that, and it does raise some issues that we probably need to consider, but I'm fairly comfortable including EV charging. I assume this would be like residential and business properties that want to add that for either themselves or their employees. I think that infrastructure is very consistent with the broad public benefit and broader clean energy goals of the program.
The other thing that just occurred to me is that they might be linked. Somebody might be putting in the solar electric on the roof in order to charge their car.
Right.
So it's not just residential solar. It's to download the solar into their electric vehicle.
And we hope someday that those cars can be energy storage devices that'll provide some grid benefits as well.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions from members before I open to testimony? Yes, Ms. Grove.
The money from this trust fund that comes from PACE comes from the ratepayers, and they're correct or not correct?
It's part of the public benefits charge, right?
The CSI.
It was actually created under the California Solar Initiative.
But the ratepayer is the ultimate payer of this program.
Yes.
Okay. And if
Right, electric utility ratepayers.
Yeah, if the electric utility ratepayer, so the common taxpayer or individual out there that has a home, If we
Or property, a
or
commercial.
property owner,
Right,
commercial.
or any electrical user.
If we change what we do, because I don't know that PACE extends it to that. I mean, I don't understand it that way.
Extends it to which?
It extends it to the fact that it goes to everything. I thought PACE was just strictly for the solar and renewable on the homes.
No, it was always for commercial additionally. The PACE
or
program was
commercial,
for
but solar. Water.
energy efficiency, water efficiency, and solar installation on properties, whether they be commercial or residential.
My concern is the betrayal of the ratepayer. You know, they were forced to pay this percentage of their PG&E bill for this purpose, and now because of the housing market, Freddie Mac, Freddie and Fannie, we are changing the direction of where we're spending this money. How come we don't return it to the ratepayer?
Well, actually, if we just take it from the PACE point of view, we're not changing the direction. We are still, the purpose of it originally was to basically benefit a property owner, whether residential or commercial, to basically bring down their load, meaning either by upgrading their property from an efficiency point of view, then ultimately their utility bills would drop, or if they upgraded it from installation of, say, a photovoltaic system or a solar water heating system, again, they would see a benefit on their bill because they would no longer be paying for the electric or the gas required for that generation otherwise. So the only difference is that in the original PACE program, they were going to pay via their property tax assessment. Now they will pay through a loan from a bank. So it still has the exact same purpose and the same benefit to a property owner, whether residential or commercial, and basically bringing down their utility
So
costs.
the state's going to guarantee or use that money to guarantee or buy down loans for individuals that have already paid this into. They're using their own money to buy down loans. Is that what you're explaining to me?
The Renewable Trust Fund is there as a loan guarantee for the possibility of defaults. And when in other places where similar programs, the default rate has been very, very low. So it won't necessarily drain the Renewable Trust Fund, but it holds it in reserve in case there are defaults.
And then so the reserve will pick up that default if somebody
case,
does default.
yes,
So the
yes.
taxpayer is guaranteeing or the ratepayer is guaranteeing these loans.
In the same way that we now use the various of our either renewable trust fund or public benefits charge to do, say, appliance rebates, or under the CSI rebates on solar photovoltaic facilities, or window installations, right? So there's a whole host of energy efficiency, either upgrades or appliances, or photovoltaic installations, or hot water heater, solar hot water heater installations that have other, where the ratepayers, in effect, are providing support for that, and in return, ratepayers get the benefit from both either reduced costs on their own bills or by reducing the demand on peak, helping to create so we don't have spikes in cost.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from committee members before I open it up to public?
Can
Yes.
I just add something
Mr.
to what
Dickinson.
Ms. Skinner just said? Because the last point I think she made really is responsive to the question Ms. Grove raised about ratepayers in the aggregate, and so I wanted to just underscore it, which is to the extent that energy efficiency reduces energy demand, it means that in the aggregate, utilities have to go out and spend less on capital investment to secure energy supplies, and operating costs ultimately can go down, especially peak. So even if I'm a ratepayer and I don't do anything to my house to increase its energy efficiency, but you do, the fact that I'm going to contribute a little to guarantee the loan you get actually can inure to my benefit significantly, because in the future our utility is not going to have to go out and buy more energy from wherever it gets it, or figure out a way to produce more energy that's going to cost me money as well as you.
Okay. If there's no further comments or questions from committee members, can I ask for witnesses in favor of the bill? Please tell us your name and affiliation for the record, please.
Thank you. Good morning, members. Diane Stanton, representing the State Treasurer's Office. We're in support. We will be providing the financial assistance piece and working in partnership with banks to provide these loans. Thank you.
Did the Treasurer's Office have any, or does the Treasurer have any perspective on the question of the sort of what's in and what's out, raising the question of the EV charging? I mean, in terms of the original purpose of this fund, does it in any way cause any problem in terms of the boundary lines of what's in?
Right. We actually haven't, to my knowledge, we haven't looked into that question specifically. Again, I think the point was made in the presentation that if it were part of a project to help offset and get those vehicles recharging, if that was part of the purpose and the use, we've only been looking at the financing piece from the commercial and residential side, not for vehicles specifically.
Okay, thank you. Other comments or questions, or other testimony in favor? Yes,
something to the Treasurer's Office, and I'd ask that, assuming this passes and gets signed and implemented, that the Treasurer's Office work very closely with local governments. Local governments, I think, as Ms. Skinner noted in her opening comments, were ready to, in some cases, had launched, but in many cases were on the cusp. In fact, Sacramento County had an Energy Commission grant for $16.5 million and was the lead for 18 counties and about 130 cities and other local governments ready to go when Fannie and Freddie pulled the rug out. And I won't editorialize about my feelings on that point at the moment. But what it means is there are people
they were ready to go
all over the place in local government who are familiar with this program, enthusiastic about it, want to see it implemented, and I think are a great resource for getting information out and making it easy for people to connect with the lenders, the Treasurer's Office, whoever they need to be in contact with in order to get these loans.
I think that's a really good point, Mr. Dickinson, because there's been a lot of marketing that was done for PACE. I went to a community meeting in Sonoma County to kick this thing off, and there were 200 building contractors. It's like a pep rally. They were so excited that they were going to be putting people back to work to do these installations, but getting the word out that this opportunity exists and figuring out how to make the connections, especially in those communities that had already taken steps to do so, like Ms. Skinner's district and like Sacramento and like Sonoma. I think it'd be a shame to not build on that momentum. Because it is one of the areas where we can be putting some people who used to be building houses back to work for a while, hopefully retrofitting and installing solar. So, great.
I know that with the Treasurer's Office, we explored ways that that like PACE, there could have been the direct administration by the localities, but it was very difficult to do. So we definitely, the Treasurer's Office is 100% with us in that sentiment to make sure that this program is still as aligned with what the infrastructure that the local governments put together as possible. And so there's already close communication with all the different counties and cities that did put together the infrastructure, and the Treasurer's Office and the CEC, and they are all working together.
Thank you very much. Next witness in favor. Any witnesses in opposition? Okay, a couple of thoughts. One is these are both related to the question of trying to make sure that all the money doesn't get spent on one or two massive projects, or that the charging doesn't get ahead of the solar installation, because it is possible that we wind up spending a lot of money, theoretically, on the charging and not get to the weatherization and the efficiency and the solar. So I would be much more comfortable to be doing the charging if it was linked to a solar installation. So in other words, we're paying for it as part, to connect a solar installation to a vehicle, rather than it just being freestanding, and that would reduce the chance of that happening. The second thing is that last year, SB 77, which this bill follows, correct, was limited to residential projects of 3 units or fewer and commercial projects costing less than $25,000. Again, in order to spread the money and make sure that we were doing a lot of decentralized projects and not focusing on distributed generation rather than a concentrated few projects that would soak up all the money. And I would be inclined to, depending on the will of the committee, to move this bill out with those two changes. One is placing limits on the size and amount that I just mentioned, and also linking the charging to a solar project. Yes, Mr. Monning.
As I understand your recommendation, Mr. Chair, you're favoring restoring that cap of $25,000 per project.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question on that, I don't know if Ms. Skinner has information on this. I don't know what the kind of current market cost is for installing solar. I just want to make sure we're not coming in under the mark of what it's, and then somebody ends up not doing it because the estimate from the contractor was $35,000, and presumably if you set a cap at $25,000, you could get the financing for that, and then you're on your own for the remainder. But that may be decisive in not doing it. So I would just like to get Ms. Skinner's sense of, will this, if we put a $25,000 cap, is it going to retard the achievement of what we're trying to do here?
I know that was one of the concerns of the Treasurer's Office, which is why the Treasurer's Office didn't include the cap. But what I think that the Chair's concern is legitimate, that we don't want the program to basically just finance three big projects. Our intention was to really get this out to lots of small property owners, whether they're commercial or residential. So what I would be willing, if the chair and the committee is willing, is to have you indicate the support for an amendment that would include a cap, and then let us. I know we have very short time, but let us go back to the Treasurer's Office and also to the CEC and see whether that cap is appropriately at 50,000 or is it 35?
Right. I think that it should be an informed level. I would favor that. That's
perfectly reasonable. Right. I think it's a good point. And you could even talk to the treasurer about whether or not there is a mechanism for trying to determine what the limit. There shall be a limit, but the treasurer can try to figure out what that limit should be based on what the going rate for a residential or small business installation is, or something like that. So
right.
We'll adopt a recommendation for an amendment that is not completely pinned down in terms of a dollar amount.
And just a continuation on that thought, as you explore that, we might want to set one cap for residential and maybe consider whether commercial installations are.
The only residential, the way it's written now, the only limit is on multi-unit. Limits it to a 3-unit. So on a single-family home, there's not a limit.
Okay, so this proposed limit goes then?
The number of units for residential and a dollar amount for commercial is the way it's currently drafted.
Right.
So, other...
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Mr. Dickinson.
Well, that helps because small commercial buildings or small apartment buildings that are not, especially with solar, are going to be accomplished with just a 25,000 limit. So I do think you need to go somewhat higher, and I think your approach makes good sense. Can I make a comment on the other aspect of this, the EVs, and the chair suggested tying this to solar installations. In most residential cases, at least, the quickest return and the highest benefit is going to be on things like double painting windows, insulation, things like that, not so much solar. And so I didn't know that whether it made sense to tie it to a technology.
Well, there's a little more tenuous link to tie it to reducing the load in the house than to producing electricity that would be presumably for the vehicle. I mean, I just saw a stronger link between the charging and the production of electricity versus the charging and the load reduction through conservation.
I understand the rationale. It just seems to me that if we're talking about reducing load, which in a sense creates the opportunity then to charge a vehicle as an offset, or even no worse than an offset, that was just as defensible.
What is the sense of other committee members? I'm not fixed in my. I mean, my thinking's evolving as I'm listening to it.
I do like the idea that. Let me say, I do like the idea of limiting to residential application, though.
For the charging.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think it's a reasonable proposal to say we'll limit it if the author is willing to agree that we limit it to residential and that we limit it to being linked, as Mr. Dickinson has suggested, to a project that is reducing load as well. It's not just simply charging.
What if the committee and the chair would be willing, so that I could go back to CEC and Treasurer's Office and to just if understand what the motivation was, and if those I'm not speaking against the limits, but it might end up being wiser just to remove it. So if I would have the flexibility to either limit it in the way that you suggested or remove it, that would be.
I certainly don't view it as a deal breaker. I want this bill to move. Okay. It's just we're fine tuning here, and so that being the case, I think perhaps giving the author general direction, letting her work on it between now and appropriations would be satisfactory to me. Any other comments about that?
So what I would accept is limiting it as you described, or removing it entirely.
Okay. So I think in both cases of potential amendments, we are making suggestions that you will work on between now and appropriations.
Right.
Is that satisfactory? Is there a motion to approve this bill with those understandings? And moved and seconded. Any comments or questions, members? If not, please call the roll.
Chesbro?
Aye.
Chesbro, aye. Knight? No. Knight, no. Brownlee? Aye. Brownlee, aye. Dickinson? Aye. Dickinson, aye. Grove? No. Grove, no. Halderman? No. Halderman, no. Huffman? Aye. Huffman, aye. Monning? Aye. Monning, aye. Skinner?
Aye.
Skinner, aye.
That bill is out. We are through for the day. I want to announce that the next hearing is next Monday, February 28th at 9:30. It's a joint oversight hearing with the Environmental Safety and Toxics Committee on the state's electronic waste recycling program. So thank you all very much, and we'll